Name's Peter. Oh, okay, I just got, we are recording this meeting. I'm sure you all just got the notification. I work in product security here in Boise, and want to welcome everyone on behalf of the local Boise OWASP chapter. This is our very first meeting, so we're excited. We're excited to get this local chapter started. As many of you know, OWASP is an online community for security professionals, generating tools, methodologies, documentation, training, all in the aim of improving the field of web application security or application security. So what is OWASP Boise? It's just OWASP on a smaller scale here in Boise. So OWASP encourages chapters in cities that have a growing technology industry to form a local chapter, and Boise and Idaho obviously fit that bill. We've been growing a lot of new technology companies. A lot of people adjacent to security are working in security in the valley. First and foremost, we're hoping that OWASP Boise will be a user community. We want this to be a platform for people interested in security across Boise and the Treasure Valley and Idaho in general to network, collaborate, and share security, learning and information. Just a quick overview of what's coming with OWASP Boise. Right now, we plan to meet every 3 months for small security talks. Obviously, this first one is online. Eventually, we'd like to bring them in person. So please attend future talks. Please invite colleagues who are interested in security, even if they don't work directly in security, to join these talks. Please propose future session talks, discussions, tabletop exercises. We really hope that people can jump in and get as involved as they want. Please join our meetup page to keep an eye out for future events. I'm going to go ahead and post the link here in the chat. Please join OWASP Slack community. If you go and sign up through to OWASP Slack community, you will find that there's a chapter, there's a channel called Chapter Boise, and please reach out with any questions on and getting set up with Slack. That's a nice way to kind of have asynchronous communication about different topics. And please, everybody, please just take a moment to post a little information about yourself in the call chat, your role, where you work, security interests, etc. We'd like to give Ray, who's our speaker today, some time to chat or go through his talk, but at the end, we're open to have a Q&A and kind of open discussion. So it'd be good to associate names to faces. So I'm really excited to introduce our guest speaker today. When we started the OWASP Boise chapter, we reached out to the Portland chapter to see if they had any suggestions about potential speakers, and Ray was one of the first people they recommended. So he comes highly recommended. He'll be speaking today about lightweight threat modeling for developers. It's an AppSec professional whose work can be found at a blog, Hella Secure. I'm going to go ahead and throw that in the channel as well. His bio states that he's a life coach, conspiracy theorist, and exorcist. Oh, and that he does AppSec in his non-spare time for money. So please feel free to post questions in the chat for the Q&A period at the end, or unmute yourself and ask questions directly. On that note, thank you. Thanks again, Ray, for agreeing to come talk to us today, and the floor is yours.
Thanks. Yeah, sorry about that. I thought that was funny. That's why, and it was just my Twitter bio. So, but yeah. So I'm Ray LeBlanc. I'm an application security architect over at Cambia Health Solutions. We are Regents Blue Cross Blue Shield. So you guys may know us over in Idaho as Blue Shield of Idaho. So I'm an application security architect. I've been in healthcare for 4 years. I've been doing AppSec for 8 years, and I have about 7 years of software development experience. So I started in AppSec in 2011, when it felt like everything was brand new. I mean, the field was only like 10 years old at the time. It still feels like a lot of the stuff is brand new, which is nice. Let's see. So I pivoted from development to AppSec because I worked for a company called White Hat Security, and I helped develop the C# static analysis engine to scan source code for vulnerabilities. And that's kind of what got me really into AppSec. And I've been in AppSec ever since. This is a little slide about Cambia Health Solutions. I'm not going to go through it, but let's get into threat modeling. So the big thing about threat modeling is that there's a million different ways to do it. And I have like 3 books on threat modeling, but Adam Shoshak's book is probably like the definitive reference guide of threat modeling, right? I mean, he kind of made software threat modeling a thing. So this is how we define threat modeling at Cambia. So we're saying that it's an industry best practice by which potential threats can be identified and enumerated during the software design phase, and mitigations can be prioritized. So I probably stole that from Wikipedia for our documentations. And really, what we're trying to accomplish with threat modeling is we're trying to reduce the risk. And how I like to think about everything is in risk. And it's as I get more and more into the insurance side of the business, it's actually easier to think about risk, because that's all insurance is risk, right? Oh, also feel free just to throw your questions in chat, and I will get to them after I go through the presentation, and we can talk on whatever subjects you want. So here's some definitions. These aren't needed, but they're really nice to have. I don't remember where I got these definitions from, but so the big ones that I like to touch on are trust boundaries, zero trust, and that's really the ones that we talk about. And you'll see why zero trust is important in a minute when I go through like the story of how Cambia came to start doing threat modeling. Okay, so the first attempt, we were like full on Stride. Stride is spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and escalation of privilege. So like when we tried to implement this was a very heavy lift for our developers. We had to have data flow diagrams. We had to have, we kind of took it right out of the book, and like I liked it. It gave us a lot of information on the security side, but the devs A, hated doing it, and B, they didn't get as much out of it as the AppSec people did, because it's kind of these kind of things like make a lot of sense to me, but to the devs, it really wasn't the time that they sunk into it versus what they got out of it made it not worth it to them. But it was definitely worth it to me. Stride attempt number 2, we still use Stride, but we kind of broke it down. One of my friends gave me this, and we kind of just wrote down risks in charts, and then we graphed it on here. It still took a lot of work. We kind of were like, hey, you don't need a data flow diagram if you don't have one. We still would like you to make one if you have one, but it's not a big deal if you don't. This caught on a little bit better, but it was still a very heavy lift, and the developers never really fully embraced Stride. I think they kind of got the concept, but it just wasn't their cup of tea. And that slowly pivoted into, I saw a talk by Avi Duglin at OWASP in like 2017, 2018, at one of the OWASP USA, so global OWASP events. I don't remember which one it was, but it was a really great talk and I really liked it. And if you get a chance, go on YouTube and watch Avi's threat modeling talk. It's a absolutely great talk. And so his value-driven threat modeling asks the 4 questions, but they're kind of rephrased. So the 4 questions are, hold on. What are we building? What can go wrong? What are we doing, or what are we going to do about that? And then, did we do a good enough job? And then, like, I noticed that he kind of threw out that last question, and I actually took a thing from his book and kind of threw out that last question, because while we're in the design phase, we're not actually looking at, did we do a good enough job? That for us, that comes a bit later during the implementation phase. And we haven't really fully gone back to reflect on that yet, but we will in the future. But his questions are, why are we building this? But really the question is, what value does this add, right? So a feature needs to add users, revenue. Like, why are we building this from a business perspective? And I really like that line of thinking. What needs to go right? And then how do we make sure this happens? So this is like the mitigations, right? So he scoped it, and this is kind of what really got me thinking when I was going through this and creating this a lightweight approach, was scoping it to each user story, each feature, epic, and sprint planning. And the idea of the agile approach of just enough threat modeling kind of really resonated with me. And then the threat model goes in the ticket, which I was just like, yes, the work needs to live where the devs work, right? Like that those are the 3 big items that I really got out of his talk, is in that scope session of like, scope it small, have just enough threat modeling, and then where does the work go? It needs to go where the developers work, right? So his whole thing was find the value, and that's like follow the money. Like, he had a how do people die kind of worst case scenario. Like, what if something goes wrong? What's like the worst thing that can happen, right? And what's the actual value in the product? Knowing your product is actually one of the big keys to threat modeling, because a lot of the business logic is really what we want to threat model. Because we have scanners for vulnerabilities, we have pen testers to find vulnerabilities, we have that. But like, when you're looking at it from the follow the money perspective, like where that actual value is for that feature, or that application or service, it kind of really like makes you know what that application is doing if you're thinking in this way. how the users are using the product, right? So his workflow was like, state the story goals, describe the correct flow and failure states, highlight assumptions and conditions, validate assumptions and reinforce conditions, explicitly handle failure states, and we're just explicitly calling out that we're doing this. And the reason why we're explicitly calling it out is so there's a concept in quality assurance and software development. So there are functional requirements and non-functional requirements. And basically what Avi is doing here is making security a functional requirement by explicitly calling it out. So a functional requirement is something like a user can pay with his credit card, like pay his bill with his credit card, right? That's a functional requirement. Uptime or performance, security are generally things that are non-functional requirements, where we want performant web apps, but we generally don't put that in our business use cases, right? We don't, the business just assumes that things are going to be performant, things are going to be secure, things are going to be tested properly, right? So they generally don't write their use cases for the non-functional requirements. And what Avi did was he's like, we're going to explicitly write functional requirements into or create security goals into functional requirements, right? And how he accomplishes this or suggests to accomplish this is with the definition of done. So the user stories include a threat model and security tests. If you're familiar with Cucumber, that's what he's using. So Gherkin is a language that Cucumber uses to kind of write business requirements in a way that the business and developers can understand what exactly needs to happen in the workflow. And I will show, I think on the next one, I will show you what a sample looks like. And then security unit tests when possible. So here's a sample of Gherkin. So the feature is login functionality for a social network site. So given that I'm a user on a social network site, when I enter username as username1 and I enter password as password1, then I should be logged in and redirected to the homepage, right? This is a bad example of Gherkin, and if my QA people saw this, they'd probably be like, this is awful. But the point is that it's a simple thing to kind of get my point across of what Gherkin is. But this is a business requirement, and nowhere in here does it say that there needs to be brute force protections. There needs to be like a WAF in front of it. How to implement checking the username and password, right? It doesn't say anything about SQL injection or remote code execution. Those are all non-functional requirements. And we had a lot of back and forth with the QA people. One of the QA people at my company, he was very heavily involved in helping me with this threat modeling, and we had a hard time justifying adding non-functional requirements into the Gherkin. And this is ultimately why this value-driven threat modeling, that's the name of this talk, by the way. So if you on YouTube, it's value-driven threat modeling. It's a really great talk. That's why it ultimately didn't work for us, is because we couldn't justify putting non-functional requirements into the Gherkin, which is solely meant for functional requirements, because we have standards, and my standard for AppSec has like 97 or 96 requirements in it. And like, so what we're telling all the devs, if we're starting to put that in, is that we're adding 30 to 40 requirements, because not all requirements are useful to all apps, right? So that was our big thing. Let's see. Okay, so then we came up with what we call threat modeling Lite inside Cambia. This is what we considered a very lightweight process. Ultimately, what we did was myself and Zach, who is the other application security engineer at Cambia, along with a few devs, is try to figure out what is the bare minimum we can get devs to do and call it threat modeling. That was the entire goal of threat modeling Lite, is like, what is the bare minimum we can do and be able to say that we did some sort of threat modeling. And so this is a very, I'm going to say, prescriptive in how you do this. Like, it's a little background on how I came up with this is I worked at Zappos for 2 years, and they have a thing in Zappos, how they kind of govern their business is a process called holacracy. I didn't like holacracy, but I loved holacracy meetings. Holacracy meetings were very much, they were prescriptive. Like, they were, this is how you conduct a meeting. And I really like that. So that's kind of what I set out to do, is tell the developers exactly how they should conduct the meeting. So we start with, we need at least 3 people. I'd recommend never going over 6 people. And if all possible, try to keep managers out of it. And that some managers might be like, oh, no, I want to be a part of this. Well, the thing that I found out is developers are a lot more open when their managers aren't around. I guess most employees are a lot more open when their managers are not around. And this is not like the rule, but it's like, it's a good guideline. We definitely have managers that participate in this, and it works very well. But for the most part, I tend not to invite managers when scheduling these meetings. And I tend not to invite anyone more than 6 people. Like 3 to 5 people is like the ideal size that I found. It makes it so that everyone's comfortable participating. And that's really the biggest thing, is we want participation in this, because this is all happening online right now. And I mean, we did it a couple in person, but most of the threat models have been done online over like Teams or Zoom or something like that, right? And it's really hard to get people to participate online. But when there's only 3 or 4 people in the room, like if one person's not participating, it's very easy to notice and call on them. Where bigger groups, people tend to like kind of silo, and then you'll get 1 or 2 developers that are kind of like the lead developers or interested in security really leading the conversation, which is fine. But this is a group activity, and we frame it as a brainstorming activity. So, oh, hold on, let me go back really quick. So the 3 people that you need to bring at the bare minimum is the facilitator. Basically, the facilitator's job is to get to document the threat model, and to ask questions and keep the conversation going. That is the facilitator's job. You kind of want someone technical in this position to know what questions to ask, but that's not absolutely necessary. I'm going to get to a second why it's not necessary, but we want the developer of that feature or developers of that feature, and then someone else that's familiar with the product or the feature. And this could be a developer. This can be, I like to get the business side of people involved, like the project manager or the product owner involved as well, if they're able to make it. But this could just be another developer on your team that has knows enough about the product or the feature that can speak to it, right? So here's the steps that I kind of go through. Is the facilitator asks, how would you attack we're right here, we're asking what could go wrong, right? This is that is step one. We're asking how this can be attacked, and we have some probing questions sample questions that we give to developers. And this is the step two, is the brainstorming. This is where everyone's kind of throwing stuff up, and then after we get a bunch of stuff, we talk about the mitigations on how to fix those things. And then we document the threats in a secure YAML file, and then we push that YAML file to the code repo, and all the relevant threats, the facilitator or the developer, whoever's assigned to create JIRA tickets for the threats that need JIRA tickets created. So at the last 5 minutes, we assign which threats are we actually going to fix. And I will talk to that when I show you the secure YAML. Okay, so Autodesk has a really cool questionnaire called continuous threat modeling, and it's on GitHub. And this is where we took these questions from. So here's 4 sections, and this is kind of what we use the continuous threat modeling for these sample questions that we give to the facilitators. And it allows the facilitators, if we're talking about auth or access controls or trust boundaries or auditing, they have 20 different sections, and there's 50 questions on it. It's actually really good. I would suggest looking it up. I think they gave an OWASP talk on their stuff too. It's a good talk as well, so I would check that out. But so this is how the facilitator keeps the questions going. Is we have a bunch of sample questions. So if it's touching on auth, we ask these 2 questions, right? So some notes on how we on this process is we threat model. So even though we're not 100% zero trust in some of our environments, we threat model like we are. And we do that because we should be designing for zero trust, even if we do trust a vendor or we trust an internal system. The ultimate, we ultimately want to get to a zero trust model, where a service should never trust anything outside of that service, right? So we always threat model like we are in a zero trust environment. We have, these are just guidelines, by the way. So we try not to spend more than 5 minutes per feature, and no more than 30 minutes at a single time doing a full threat model of a service. And that's because I have some tenets within the Cambia AppSec program that's kind of say AppSec has to respect the developer's time. So that's kind of where this stuff comes in, is we want it to be quick and easy. And remember what I said, this is a brainstorming exercise. So it takes a lot of the pressure off developers. And then Avi had this quote up, and I really liked it. So I kind of stole that from him. All threat models are wrong, but some are useful. And this is one thing that I always try to impress upon my devs, is that I don't care if you have ridiculous threats or you have 1 threat or 1 million threats. As long as they're useful to you, that's all that really matters, right? Is that we're slowly moving the ball forward on security. And that's really what I'm trying to accomplish. The idea of threat modeling Lite is that I am trying to get developers to think about security for 5 minutes when they work on a feature. That's literally what I'm trying to do. Like, have them spend 5 minutes focused on security of their feature. And if I can get them to do that, that is a big win. If they come up with 0 threats, like, I really don't care because they thought about security, right? So they're going to be more aware of like the other security trainings that they've taken, SQL injection, cross-site scripting, things like that, because this kind of just focuses them on spending 5 minutes thinking about security. And that's all I really want. So the secure YAML, this is the receipt, right? So I kind of tell the developers, like, when you're getting a massage, right? Like, or like any kind of service done, right? There's nothing physical that you get, but you get a bill at the end. This is kind of like the receipt, right? Saying that you paid your 5 minutes of security thinking and brainstorming. And like, this is the receipt, but like the work that I actually care about, like, I don't care about the security YAML. It's nice. We have plans to ingest it in the future through some automation that we're currently working on. But like, ultimately, the goal is to get devs thinking about security when they're developing features. So I can just walk you through the security YAML. So we have the stack name, so that's the name of the service. The team name, that's I guess the team's name. So the service type, it kind of, we're trying to standardize these, but like, it's going to be like REST API or gRPC API, or like, we're just describing what it is. If it's just a web app, you just write web app or web page, whatever you want to write. It's all free-form text, but it just kind of gives us a little location, a little more technical background for InfoSec to actually figure out what's going on, what this actually does. Host location, so we actually have, it says cloud, but we actually have 3 different hosting environments. We have an on-prem and we have 2 cloud environments, and we have specific names for those environments. So we actually have them put that specific name of where it goes. So this kind of is helping us build an inventory of useful information for us. Is it in production? Is it externally facing? Data classification. We have internal data classifications like every other company does. Ours is a 1 through 5 scale. And so we know what the data classification is. So the first thing is like basically like useful service information for AppSec. Like the devs really don't get a whole lot out of this, but we ask them to fill it in anyways. Then we have product tags, and this is how they can kind of write custom tags. So we can say if this service is part of like our portal or our mobile app, like if it's a backend API for a mobile app or something like that, we can know what product these services hit, and some services hit multiple products. And it's nice to know like what each service is connected to. Then we have this idea of resources I consume. So we have internal and external resources. So internal resources would be like my gateway service hits the authentication service, right? Or the consent service, or whatever service that we need to hit, and we document it there. And then external services are things that are beyond our control, outside of the company. That could be Salesforce, like we may be hitting a Salesforce API. But this gives us a nice kind of, we actually take this information, we throw it into a graph database, and we can actually see all of the service dependencies of whatever of this example service, right? So we can build a little graph based off of it. And then the next thing is just the threat model. So title, it's whatever, these are all free form. So the example that I'm giving is a SQL injection. I like to give a SQL injection example because it's applicable to most apps, and developers get what SQL injection is, so it's easy for me to explain it. But one thing I would like to note is ideally, we would not want to have developers have like your just common vulnerabilities in here. And I let them get away with it. I let them put it in there because like it makes them like until they realize that like these aren't what we're really looking for. What we're really looking for is that business value, right? The stuff that we can't actually think about, or that we don't actually think about, like the workflows, how data flows through the system, things like that. Like business logic is a great example of things we want to put in the secure YAML, but do not stop your developers from putting stuff like SQL injection or XSS, because that's them kind of getting comfortable with this, and that those behaviors will kind of drop off as they see that, well, every app connected to a database is going to have SQL injection in it. And that's why we have a policy that says your app must be, or a standard that says your app must be resilient against SQL injection, right? That's why we're doing these scans. So you're going to start seeing, as your devs are doing this, they're going to stop doing the stuff that shows up every single time, because like that's not what we're really threat modeling for. We're not threat modeling vulnerabilities, right? We have scanners for that. But I say let them do it at first, because it helps them build confidence and kind of understand the threat modeling process. So I'd like to start off with this very simple example of SQL injection, because it's very easy to understand. So the status can be open or closed. So usually whenever I do a SQL injection stuff, I'm like, is your app vulnerable to SQL injection? I can check the scan logs, and if it isn't, or we can look at the code, right? If it isn't vulnerable, I just close the ticket. I just write closed in it, and we don't worry about this again. The risk is simple. It is high, medium, or low. So I tell the developers, high is something that we're going to fix in the next 2 sprints. Medium is something that we're going to fix this year. And then low is something that we will never fix. And if we classify something as low, we can always go back, because remember, this is in Git. We can always go back and say, well, this is now a medium, and we actually want to fix this. So this is how we kind of determine what tickets to open and what not to open, and where to put those tickets. So if we want to put them in the backlog or not in the icebox, like we'll throw mediums in the icebox, because we have to fix them, but like that is not a huge priority, where the backlog is something that's like, yeah, like we need to fix the SQL injection vulnerability, or we need to fix this business logic vulnerability. And remember, this is not going to give you that complete stride threat model with data flow, and that was not the design purpose of this, right? And then the description is we kind of describe what a SQL injection is, so anyone reading it can kind of understand it. And the mitigation for SQL injection, we're like, okay, we're going to use prepared statements. Things that I would note when I'm doing this. So this has actually been fairly successful for us. We have a number of teams now doing this on their own. We have threat models for all of our major products, but we have teams threat modeling individual services, and they're doing it without us. They're not, and that's exactly what I want them to do. Is if I don't have to be involved in the threat model, that's fine, and that's why we have the secure YAML. So when we build, or we can scrape Git, right, and pull this information and see if they're threat modeling or not. And eventually we're going to, like I said, we're going to build out automation to alert whenever a threat model hasn't been touched in 6 months, for example, right? So far it's been pretty successful. We have, like I said, we have about a quarter of our teams that are actively doing this. Maybe not as frequently as I like, but I try to trust the developers that they know when to get me involved. They know when to do threat models, and so far I've been liking what I'm seeing. So, but yeah, so that is basically the process that we currently go through. So was this using Microsoft's threat modeling tool? No, so I've never actually used Microsoft's threat modeling tool. I'm assuming that you're talking about this slide right here.
Yeah.
This might have been created using Microsoft's threat modeling tool. I'm not. I guess this whole process is to get devs doing threat modeling on their own, and having them learn a tool is just not a good use of their time, as I see it and as they see it. So I don't require them to use any tools. That's why we document in a YAML file.
Yeah, I think I saw later in your talk the direction you took it, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, and so for definitions, so there's a question asking about zero trust. So this is kind of the definition we use for our zero trust, is that it's misworded here, but it says any service should not trust any entity inside or outside of the perimeter at any time. So there's like a million different versions of zero trust, but what I'm saying, what I'm trying to say is, if it's not the service itself, like we shouldn't, like we should verify like through JOTs or session tokens that like, or API keys that this service has permissions to access this information, right? And my zero trust is very much based in the world of access controls, that in applications of like, can this entity access this piece of data, and making sure that there's authentication and authorization controls around that access of data. And zero trust is, like I said, there's like a million different ways to do zero trust, and it's defined like a billion different ways. And I like to keep it simple. Like I like to like, maybe I should change it from zero trust to like, just do not trust anything except for the service itself.
No, it's all good. I run into this all the time, so I was just curious if you had a working definition, or if you're like, trying to follow like the NIST documentation that they published in October that has very prescriptive, like, this is how you do zero trust on a network. That's I was just curious. I hear it bandied about all the time, so I'm always curious as to what people define as zero trust.
Yeah, I just tell them, don't trust anything outside of your service. Like, don't even trust the file system or the database, right? We don't trust anything outside of that one particular service. So that's kind of how I define it. And yeah, like I'm like kind of abusing the word just like the vendors do, and that's bad. But it's a nice phrase, I would say, and developers can understand it when I say zero trust. Like and I tell them, don't trust anything outside of the service. They just get it. Okay, let's see. To the extent of, so this is embedded in our process. Like I said, some teams are doing it more proactively, and other teams we schedule 30-minute meetings with the teams for new services that come online. And ideally, once we get the new service, like we want to get it as close to the design phase as possible. But depending on the team, it may happen after the fact. It may happen while they're coding. But like we're slowly trying to, like, as they say, shift left, right? And it really just depends on the maturity of the team. And if teams have a really good grooming process, we very much suggest that they do this within their grooming process with the whole team involved. Even though that I said that it's supposed to only be like 3 to 6 people, and some teams are like 11 people, and the managers are in the grooming process. But like, as long as they're doing the threat modeling, like, yes, we would like it done earlier, but we're not complaining if it's done eventually. So hopefully that answers.
Yeah, there's no organizational policy that it's a blocker to deployment to production if they haven't done a threat model. It's still just kind of driving adoption, and you hope that they adopt it and require it themselves on their development team.
Correct. And we're working on, it's not a hard block. We're working on a soft block of, we have, before there's in one of our environments, there's like 10 security and compliance questions that every team has to fill out before they can deploy into production. And we're going to get that. We're going to get, did you do a threat model, added to those questions, where it's not going to block anything. It's going to just be yes or no. It's not going to block anything, but like, it's kind of us saying, let's say, this is important enough to ask, and hopefully the developers are like, well, they're asking me about it. If we say no, what's going to happen, right? But we're really not going to block anything based off of doing a threat model. That's not true in all cases. Some things some systems do require threat models and a lot more security reviews. If a dev team has already put together a rudimentary threat model, do you find it more useful as a starting point? I prefer not to be involved in the threat modeling process at all. Is my answer to that question. It takes me a lot of time to get up to speed into what the application or the service is supposed to be doing. So the developers know this space better than I do. If they're asking very pointed security questions or asking me advice on how to do certain implementations, like I'm always there for the devs, and they can pull me in at any time to help them do a threat model. But yes, like any kind of documentation that already exists is already going to be 100% more helpful than not having documentation. And most of our teams do data flow diagrams or like sequence diagrams and things like that. So that is already a huge step up in the threat modeling process, where when I come in, I can look at it and I can be like, let's talk about this interaction right here that's going on. Tell me a little bit more about it, right? How long have I been working with it? 2 years. So we deployed this 2 years ago, or yeah, about 2 years. So, and there was a 1 year process of like steps number 1 and number 2 that I talked about, of like getting to this threat modeling Lite. That was about a year. So, but we've been doing this for about 1.5 to 2 years of the current threat modeling Lite. So far, I'm happy with the results. So we kind of created this so there's a question that says, what do you see in the near future for threat modeling? I think it's going to be like a required process in the future. If you go look at like any AppSec conference, everyone's talking, like there's always going to be one talk about like threat modeling. I think eventually this is going to be like embedded into it. I think the current tooling out there kind of sucks, which is why we kind of had to come up with our way of doing threat modeling. Like I said, most of it is very time consuming. There's some open source projects out there. I don't know the names of them off the top of my head, but they do look somewhat promising. and they're kind of based in this this like document stuff as a YAML file. There's like a Python one where you write your threat model in Python and it generates a threat model, and I think that's kind of cool. There was one that was just released a couple days ago. I don't remember, but it's doing attack trees, and it builds out your attack tree based on a YAML file that you build. So if you do attack trees for threat modeling, I think that is kind of cool. Yeah, so it says, I believe I picked up that you encourage per feature threat model. Yes. So we do, sorry if I explained this poorly, but so we do a full threat model of the application when it gets started or after the fact. And then after we have the full threat model, we start doing per feature, or we encourage developers to do per feature. And I let them decide which features need a threat model and which features do not need a threat model. Some other things that I would note is when you're working with the developers, some are going to have really insane threats out there. Just write them down. Like, you do not want to discourage anyone from, like, I always tell the developers, like, there is no stupid threat. And if we deem that we don't want to, like, this is just like, if we deem we don't want to do this thing, we can just erase it, right? We can just delete it off of the threat model YAML, and we don't have to think about it anymore. Or we can mark it as closed, or we can mark it as low. Like, and we've gotten some really cool threat models that are like how to subvert censorship, like using our applications, right? Like, we came up with some really cool threats using the business logic in our app on how to subvert censorship. And like, that's not really a threat to us. And we were like, we kept it in the threat model because it was a very cool idea. Other things you can think of, like a cool things to threat model for your applications, file uploads. Letting developers figure out all the cool things they can do with file uploads. Like, can you use your file upload as a NAS? Like is a pretty decent threat, right? You can, if I can upload my entire DVD collection to your servers and pull it down whenever I want, like, or upload all my family photographs to your free service that is meant to store healthcare information or whatever kind of information, like, who says that I have to use your application the way you want me to use it, right? I try to encourage as much creativity as possible because the business logic vulns tend to need creativity. So try to make this as fun as possible when working with your developers. Are there any other questions? So the last thing I want to say is I think someone linked with the blog post or a blog. So I actually have a blog going into more detail about this. And I have like blog posts on security champions, and I write with a friend on hello-secure.com, and who's also in AppSec, and he is a much better writer than I do. If anything, just read his posts. His name's Aaron. He's cool. But yeah, that's it. That's all I have. So if you don't have any other questions, I'll hand it back.
Awesome. Thank you, Ray.
Yeah, this was great. And as we close out this first session, we wanted to encourage everyone who joined today. Well, first of all, thank you all, and encourage you to join us for future OWASP sessions. I'm going to post here some of the contact information for the local chapter. There's a email address that you can email us. So at least get that email address. And if you can't remember the Slack link or any of the other links, feel free to shoot us an email and we'll help get you set up. We encourage you to join our meetup page to be notified about future OWASP events in Boise. And then there's the link to this Slack channel and the Boise chapter. We recorded today's session, so we will be uploading that also to the local Boise OWASP page as well. Feel free to share that out. We hope that you can make our next meeting. We're planning on having meetings every 3 months, and we encourage you to bring some friends. And again, we want this to be community driven. So if anyone has any desire to speak at a future session, to lead a future session, or any requested topics for us to hunt down someone to come in and give a talk, we'd greatly appreciate it. Great. Thanks again, Ray, and thanks again, everyone, for attending. And I think a couple of us are going to hang out here if people want to hang out and have a little chat or sharing information. But the official clock stopped at 1, so I know probably a lot of people got to scoot. But we'll hang out here if there's any other questions.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.